What did we learn yesterday?
We learned JSX. We started a React app and saw how we could use some HTML, JavaScript, familiar things together in order
Yep.
to render things on the screen.
Started wading into JSX, the syntax React uses, started seeing, hey, we can kind of mesh these two together in a React app and get some functionality out of that. What else did we learn yesterday?
Learn some commands for the terminal.
Went over the terminal, went over ls and pwd and the concepts of, hey, whenever we run a terminal command, we're running that in whatever our working directory is, right? Whatever folder we're currently in on the terminal, and pwd will show that print working directory. We also learned about ls and how ls is going to list out all of the files in our current working directory. We played around with mkdir to make a new directory or folder. We went over cd dot dot is what's going to bring us up from our current working directory up to whatever folder we were in from there. We learned a little shortcut around dragging and dropping, right? And how we can cd space and get our working directory changed into whatever folder we drop in. Anything else from yesterday? What did we kick off yesterday with?
Are you referring to going over fetching async await?
Yes,
Um,
exactly. What API did we use?
Wow.
We used the WoW API, which may seem trivial, but gives us a good example to kind of pull in information dynamically, get a little bit more practice saying, hey, we're going to do this fetch. We need promises. We need to await that. We need to use that then. Once we get that, we're able to peel that onion back and get into that JSON data. And once we get to the level we want, we're able to apply that information directly to our document, to our inner HTML. That's really setting us up for success for the New York Times assignment. I know a couple of you guys have already turned that in, but allows you to start thinking through, hey, how do I use that API key? Where does that API key go? What does my first API call do? What does the user need to interact with? And then once the user interacts with my page, what's the other API call that I need to make in order to display the information that I need or that the user is requesting? Anything else from yesterday? Any concepts that we went over that seemed a little vague that we could spend a little bit more time on today? Any concerns? I know we're only in day 2 of React, but want to open up the floor to any questions that we may have or concepts to revisit. Okay, then. So we are going to keep going on our React concepts. I am going to start off by taking our folder from yesterday and duplicating that into what we're working with today. So I'm headed to my desktop, to my code folder. I'm going to week 13, and in my day 1, I'm going to right click and duplicate that. If you do not have a copy of what we worked on yesterday, I will send a zip file of it so you can start from our starting point as well. We're just in a playground today, right? So we're not really trying to accomplish anything. We're just kind of playing around with our React code. This is day 2. Whenever someone throws a new framework at you and it's like, hey, go learn this whole new framework, you're not expected to learn that overnight, right? And so that's why we're taking the approach that we are of saying, hey, let's go through the official documentation. Let's read through what the makers of this software have told us how to learn this. Let's play around with it, and then let's apply it in a situation where we get to build a full project out with it. So you may have a client that comes to you and says, hey, I want you to use React. And it's like, okay, well, I got to learn React first, right? I got to play around with it. I kind of have to build my own little thing to understand it. And once I do have that understanding, then I can apply it to whatever you may want. I am saying that not only to stall, but you may have noticed this is now taking a significant amount of time for my computer to copy everything over. And you're like, well, that's never taken time before. We only wrote a couple lines of code, right? It's important to remember that in our playground, we have our SRC folder. Our SRC folder here, if I hit Command I, it's going to pop up the info panel in Mac OS or in the Finder application, and it's going to show me it's only 5 kilobytes. 5 kilobytes isn't huge, pretty tiny in today's world. You know, only a couple lines of code that we've modified in there. But if we come all the way back out and look at the Command I for the entire playground folder, we get a much bigger 286 megabytes, on the order of 2,000 times bigger than just our SRC folder. That, my friends, is the power of open source software. Turns out that when we installed React and we used our Create React app, React installed a lot of what we call dependencies, right? A bunch of other software that React needs in order to run. And in fact, you can get some information out of these dependencies by opening this node modules folder. And this is more informative for you guys. You don't actually have to follow along with this, but you can see out of our entire 287 meg project, 285 megabytes of that is accounted for in our node modules. These node modules are everything it takes for React to work under the hood. It is a ton of software, and even though we only installed React requires dependencies, and those dependencies require other dependencies, and those dependencies require other dependencies. And that's what NPM is doing for us all under the hood. So I want to kick off today by showing you guys how we manage node modules and why we can safely delete them and reinstall them. So what I'm going to do is I am going to actually delete out. I'm going to make sure I'm in my day 2 folder. So I'm going to rename that. I'm going to delete out my WoW folder because I don't need that. And then in my playground, I'm going to delete the entire node modules. Now, when we go back and take a look at all of this, it's only 1.6 meg. That's obviously a much more manageable size. So I'm going to attempt to compress this and send it in the live stream channel, just in case you were not following along yesterday and would like to follow along today. You can use that zip file. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to head into my VS Code. And I'm going to file open folder, and I'm going to pop open. I'm going to make sure I'm in my day 2 folder and down in my playground. I don't want to be in day 2 itself. I'm going right into that playground folder and opening that instead. So you notice up at the top here, it does not say day 2. It says playground. I'm inside that folder. From here, I'm going to right click, open an integrated terminal. And now I'm going to try and run my npm start. And the first thing that I get is React scripts command not found. Why?
You deleted that node module.
Node modules is gone. So it's like, all right, I don't know what React scripts is. I don't know what all the stuff you've installed is. So we got to fix that. But we did not delete our package.json. And actually, that's the much more important file than the node modules folder. And here's why. If we pop open our package.json, you can see there is a long list of dependencies in here. And all of these dependencies have other dependencies of their own. One of which, the most important one, is React. But React scripts is also here, and React scripts is what's responsible for firing up React, getting it running on localhost 3000, and all of that fun stuff. So oftentimes when you are starting, when you clone down someone else's project, when you're in Git and you want to install someone's project locally and get it up and running, they will not include the node modules folder. That node modules folder is big and it's pretty intensive to clone down through Git. However, NPM does a much better job at installing all of that. So if we actually come down to our terminal, you'll notice we don't have a node modules folder until we run npm I. That I is short for install. If we actually type out the word install, it will also do the same thing. And now you'll notice over here, now I've got my node modules folder back. That npm install command said, hey, I know that I'm in your playground folder. I'm going to go open up package.json, and that command is going to look at all of these dependencies. And based off of those dependencies and its sub-dependencies, it is going to go ahead and reinstall all of the packages React needs to work under the hood. The reason why I'm calling this out is we have many, many more React projects that we're going to be working on. And on top of all of those projects, you're going to want to be able to clone other people's software. You're going to want to be able to see other projects and get other projects up and running. And whenever you're working on a Node or a React project, there are oftentimes dependencies that are all defined in the package.json. And so that's why I call attention to this npm I or this npm install command, because what that install command is doing is saying, look at the dependencies inside our package.json, and based off of those dependencies, install everything that you need into the node modules folder. Because we have done all of that work, what we can now do is run our npm start, and that is going to pop open our localhost 3000 and bring us back to the code that we left off on yesterday. So I'm going to start a live share. I'm going to give you guys a chance to get all set up, and then we are going to dive back into the documentation that we were reading yesterday. We'll also post the link to that.
My compiled says compiled with warnings.
That is okay. I have a compiled with warnings as well. Once we get through the tutorial today, if we have time at the end of class, I will resolve those warnings. If we don't have time, I will get to that tomorrow. So compiled with warnings up here is completely fine, as long as you have your localhost 3000 open in the browser and you can access that, you are all good to go. If you would like to read along with me, I posted the link to the documentation, or if you would rather just go along with my screen share, that's fine. All we have done is copied what we had from yesterday. We made sure an npm start worked. We went over npm install, and now we're just getting our windows set up, getting reacquainted into the React coding environment. And if you want to pop open app.js, you are welcome to do that. That's where we'll be spending time today.
Sorry. So after
npm space start.
Space start. Okay.
Yes.
That's the last thing I need. Okay.
npm is the name of the command, and then start is the kind of command we want to run within npm. Archero, go ahead.
I have errors on mine.
Is it something other than compiled with warnings?
Oh, compile with problems is if it's the same thing, then yeah, there's just a whole bunch of my code, this blah, blah, blah. Okay.
Can you see in your browser localhost 3000?
Hold on. Yes, I can.
And does it have a bunch of errors on it, or does it look like it's just showing your code?
Oh, it's showing my code and the errors from my code from yesterday. Okay. Yeah, that's what it's showing.
Share your screen. Let's see if we can resolve those errors, just so you've got a good starting point. Good for everyone to kind of see how we resolve React errors.
All right. Yeah, I realized I never went back to like make corrections or finish up what we were doing yesterday.
All right, let's see if we can get you over the finish line.
All right.
Okay, so it's pointing us at line 10. And the nice thing about React is it's not only telling us the first time it runs into this problem, which is in our index.js, it's telling us, hey, in app.js, right on line 10, we've got some problems. So I'm going to head over to our app.js on our line 10. And we started writing an if statement here, right? We wanted to say if his age is under than 6, return something like young. And then we said else return old, right? And what we wanted to get across here is when we call name and age combiner as a function, we're able to see whatever the output of that is right in our HTML. However, what you've got going on here is you're calling the name and the age. Those are both variables, but we didn't call this function yet. So just like in regular JavaScript, if we don't execute that function anywhere, all of that code just sits there and never gets run. So we can show how that code gets run by putting some HTML in here. And then whenever we use our curly braces, just like that template literal, these curly braces have now told our JSX, pause on the HTML, you got some JavaScript headed your way. Go ahead and run that JavaScript, and whatever the output is, dump it into here. So we can do that by calling our function just like we do in our JavaScript. And now, because your age is less than 6, it's going to show the word young. And if we increase that and set it to something higher, we get old.
Okay.
So you were following along yesterday, you just didn't finish off this if statement, and then we added in the function down here to go ahead and call it. The good news is all the code we're working on today, this is all throwaway code, right? This is just for us to play around with React. So if your code does not look identical to mine, that's okay. We're just playing around with these concepts, right? Because if we go through all, 12 different concepts, that's going to be really hard to go, all right, where do we start from here? So that's why I'm still, even though we're doing concept first and then practicing, I'm still breaking up that practice by saying, okay, let me make sure I understand what the documentation is trying to tell us by being hands-on and trying to build something with it.
All right.
But you're all caught up and good to go. Jennifer, go ahead.
Thanks. I need to share my screen because what I had yesterday is not what I have today. I don't know what the difference is, but it's not giving me the same information.
Okay, so you made the mistake, and I'm glad you made this mistake because it's a good reminder for everyone.
You're welcome.
You hit that go live button, and go live is great for static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But we now have React going on. So we can't just hit that go live button. You got it. Bingo. You got to go open an integrated terminal. And from there, if you run your npm start, what you should find is your code pops up. And you're good to go.
Better. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you.
Anytime.
Anyone else? Sorry, my dog does not like the traffic out front, so I apologize for any barking. Okay. So where we left off was rendering elements, right? So yesterday we did the hello world. We got little context into what React is. We got the very first introduction into JSX, right? And we're kind of at that point where the syntax may not make total sense yet, but we kind of have this notion of we write our JavaScript. We have this function that's just like a normal function. We can write any JavaScript inside that function, but in JSX, when we get down to this return is where our HTML starts. However, that's not a definitive line, right? Because in our HTML, we can use these curly braces, and those curly braces are telling our JSX, telling React, hold up, go run this on the JavaScript side, take whatever that output is and dump it into our HTML code. So the ultimate output is always HTML, right? What the browser sees is HTML. The only difference here is we can interweave our JavaScript in order to have more power over the execution of it, whether that's using JSX as a variable, whether that's calling a function to execute, or whether that's even taking a variable and linking it up to an attribute on an HTML element. So hopefully all of this is like, all right, I kind of get this. I'm just interweaving my JavaScript, right? Now we get down into elements. And elements are kind of interesting because normally we have our div ID root. And what React is trying to tell us in these rendering elements is under the hood, React is just using regular JavaScript. So if we look in index.js, we can see our document get element by ID root. Okay, well, we know and love get element by ID, right? We've used that with inner HTML all the time. And in fact, we can even take a look in this public folder in index.html, our div ID root is right here. And we can even prove that because over in our localhost 3000, if we go into our inspect, we can see our body element and we can see this div ID root. This root is lining up with this root right here. What React is doing is it's taking over in index.js. It's using that root to render out to show our React app. And we can prove that because over in the browser, we see our div ID root, and then all of a sudden we see our div class app and all of the HTML that we're generating out here. So just like when we use inner HTML in our JavaScript to make some HTML and we insert it in using get element by ID and inner HTML, React is kind of doing that same thing. We are able to say, go to app. App is coming in from our import up here from this file path called .app. And when we look at that app, we can tell that our entire div here is what is going to ultimately show up in our browser over here. So that's all rendering an element into the DOM is saying, is React is setting you up to say, hey, the way we bridge the gap between React code and your actual HTML is the same way we do it in JavaScript. Get element by ID, and what React is doing is taking over that document object model for us and rendering it into the browser. And so React is kind of interesting in that you can have it update. I don't know that I love this example, but React is saying that you can actually make a function update based off of when you call it. Have you guys seen set interval yet? Is that something that Ryan covered, or is maybe set timeout is something he used?
Yeah,
Okay,
you set timeout.
Okay, so set timeout. What's the point of set timeout?
Just to kind of set a time span until something runs or happens.
It's basically to put a delay on our code, right? To say, hey, this is our code, wait 5 seconds, and then go run that code. To prove the point that it's saying here, what React is saying is whenever we call that function tick, what it's going to do is use the new date to display the time. So I'm actually going to take this H2, and that is not the first time we've seen date to locale time shrink. What other project did we use date in?
Is it the blog?
The blog project, right? Whenever we made a new post, we stored the time, the date and time that was created. New date is just regular JavaScript here. So if I go back over to my React app, you can see it's 6:01:09. And whenever I refresh this page, it's pulling in the current time span. But React is kind of interesting here in that we can tell our app to rerun that function. And if we rerun the function, it will update it every so often, every however often we call that function. So if I come all the way down to the bottom of my page, I can say we set timeout and we want set timeout to call app. Now we don't do this a lot. We actually allow the component itself, the element itself, to update it as needed, but we're going to see that in a second. And then our set timeout, I'm going to say 5,000 in 5 seconds. So I'm going to save. I come back over to my browser, 6:02 on the dot. And 5 seconds later, hopefully it's not going to show me up and it's going to update. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, it's going to show me up. That's cool. What did I do wrong? Maybe I need to just pass it the function directly. Try this. Maybe I tried to get a little too fancy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, no, that's gonna show me up.
Hey, Max, I saw the seconds change. Is that what you were trying to see? See?
It should be updating the seconds 5 seconds after I load the page. So the first
Okay.
time the page loads, it's supposed to show me the time. And then 5 seconds later, it's supposed to update the app in order for it to update a second time. And I'm not quite sure why it's showing me up there, but that's okay. We're going to come back to this example in a second, or later in the class, we'll actually get this timer working. Let's actually pop open their example and see what they've got going on here. Okay, so they've got their div ID root. They get element by ID root. They call tick, which calls root to render the element, and that's why it's not updating. Okay, what we can do, I'm going to actually move our code here so this example works. See if this does it. Okay. So I'm going to use set interval instead of timeout. And what interval does is just like a timeout, except instead of saying wait 5 seconds and run the code, it's going to say every 5 seconds, go ahead and run this code. So if I come over here, we get 6:05 and 10 seconds. And if we wait another 5 seconds, now I got 6:05 and 15 seconds. Okay, and we wait another 5 seconds and it updates as well. Okay, what's that doing? We're using a set interval to call this function called update. What's update doing? It's using the render function coming from React to update our app. So oftentimes when we want a component to update, we update itself inside its own component. But what React is trying to tell you here is anytime that we want the app to update, what we're able to do is just call that function. The good news is React has a concept called state, in that whenever we update a variable that is stored in the state, that component is going to automatically update for us. Basically, what they're trying to get at here is that whenever we want to update our data, we don't need to update it using an inner HTML. React is smart enough to go ahead and automatically re-render as required. That's a theoretical concept that we're going to learn a little bit more as we keep going here. If that went over your head, that's okay. It's going to connect in a second when we get into state. So let me put this back to the way it was. Okay. So now we get into the fun part, which are components. Components are the guts of not what only makes our React code easier to separate out into separate files. Components are what makes our code reusable. In other words, we can have one component run multiple times without having to repeat our code. What concept is that called in programming where we don't need to repeat ourselves?
Reusable code?
Reusable code, but when we dry, don't repeat yourself. Whenever you hear someone say dry out your code, they're saying, hey, you made this thing that's repeated over and over again, and because of that, it's not very dry code. To prove this, we're going to do a little example here. Again, all of this code tonight, you're not going to have to turn in. It's not a homework assignment. So I would encourage you, even if you're someone who codes along, normally go along for the ride tonight, unless you're someone who's like, I'm not going to get it unless I follow along. And at that point, you're still welcome to follow along with me, and the live stream is up there. What we're going to do is we're going to use a card example from Bootstrap. So I'm going to go get Bootstrap, just like I always do. I'm going to go to the Bootstrap documentation. I'm going to go to the quick start. I'm going to go down and I'm going to grab this whole link tag. I'm going to copy it, go to my index.html, and go ahead and paste that in. Okay. Now it's kind of common to us. That's how we get Bootstrap working. You can go back over to our app.js and take a look at our React. And in theory, everything should be here and be bootstrappy. We can go back over to Bootstrap. I'm going to go to their components and go get the card. I'm going to come down here, and this is their whole card. I'm going to copy this, come back over. And in theory, I should be able to use my div class row, and I can use my div class call, and I can put my whole card in there. And I'm going to take out this image for now. And I can come down here and do another, I got to find the end of my call, which is here, and do another div class call and paste all of that in. And now take out these styles because I want the style to be controlled by the width of the column itself. Now I've got two cards in here. Okay, this is pretty standard HTML, right? This is copying and pasting from Bootstrap. But I've got a lot of repeated text in here, right? If I ended up having 3 of these cards, what I would end up having to do is copy and paste all of this over again. What Bootstrap allows us to do is to define our own component. The way you can think of a component is its own HTML, right? Its own, we're making our own HTML element out of all of this. To show you how we do that, I'm going to go down here. I'm still in the app.js file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my own new function. My function is going to act as a component here. So this is where like core guts of React come in, right? So I'm going to go over this concept a couple of times just to make sure you guys are getting this, right? So I'm going to make a function, and I'm going to break camel case. We are going to name our function starting with a capital letter. because in React, the way we can tell apart a function, an element built into HTML with our own component is by capitalization. So when we see an H6, we go, oh, that's lowercase h, that's just an HTML element. When we see a p tag or a div tag, right, that's all lowercase. So we know that's our own. But in React, if we make our own component, we are going to name that component with a capital letter. So I'm going to say const card. Now our component is just like a normal function. The difference is that our function can return out some HTML. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to grab my entire div class call. I need to be careful and make sure I'm getting that out right. I'm going to take my whole div class call and I'm going to move that down into my card. Now, what do we know about functions? Functions don't run unless we call that function somewhere. Well, our function is here. How am I going to call that? Well, normally we would see something like console log card, and that's how we would call the function. But in React, we can tell our JSX to run our functional component by calling it as its own tag. So in here, in my row, I can put in my own card. So I come over here, I got my 2 cards. Okay, let's take a step back there because that's a really core concept that we want to understand. We came down and we made our own function. This is a function that we know and love. The only difference is I called it a capital because it's a component, it's a function that we're making ourselves. It's not an element that is built into HTML. Now in React, whatever, and in JSX, whatever we return is what's going to show up inside that component. Inside that component, I put in my whole card and all of my details about it. Okay, but we need to execute that function. We need to call that function somewhere. So what we're able to do is come back up and in another function in our app return, call that function because it's saying that's a component. So what it's doing is it's going down to this code and it's returning it out. We can prove that that's working because I can now delete my other card and I can put in 3 cards. And now when I come back over to my browser, I've got 3 cards showing up. So I'm going to pause there, let you guys play around with this code on your own. Alba, go ahead.
So basically you're creating a card that you could call out, but it has to be within a row.
It doesn't necessarily have to be inside a row. In this example, just because I wanted the columns to work, I put it inside a row, but it doesn't need to be in its own row.
Okay.
So you create a component, name that component, have some variables underneath it, and then you create a tag with the same name as the component and it will show up.
You got it.
I like React.
So what we're setting ourselves up here is saying we can make one card, and in a minute we're going to get into how to customize that card, but we can make one card and then reuse that as many times as we want. So I'm going to pause there because this is
code in app.js or the HTML.
app.js. JSX likes to work a lot better in JS than it does in HTML files. So I'm going to pause there and let you guys just play around with this. And I'm going to launch a poll. And when you guys are ready to move on, feel free to vote in the poll. But read through this code, make sure that this is sinking in, make sure you understand when I call card here, what it's really doing is going down to this function and putting in all of this code into right here. About half you guys voted in the poll. Going to give everyone a minute more for this to sink in. If any questions pop up, you want to talk through anything, let me know.
Can you show me how it looks in your browser?
I got 3 cards.
My cards are showing one on top of the other.
Do you have your cards inside a class name called row? And do you have the col before you have the card? And did you put the bootstrap link into your index.html?
That's what I need.
Good, because I was out of ideas of where it could go wrong. Okay, so have you guys figured out a limitation of our cards yet?
I guess, so what do you do if you want some different stuff shown in there?
Bingo. So I come down here and I want to make 3 cards, right? I want it to say card 1, card 2, card 3. So I come down to my card and I adjust my card title and I'm like, hey, this is now card number 1. And I go over here and I got 3 card number 1s. And I'm like, well, that's no fun. I want to be able to change that up. So what I do is I can use a notion called properties. Now, properties should look just like HTML attributes do. The difference is in React, when we're making our own components, we call those attributes that we add onto the tag properties. So what we do, or props, I'm sorry, we call them props. So on my card, I can add a prop. We can name our props anything. And I'm going to call this card number 1. And I'm going to add 2 more props on. I'm going to add card num 2. And I'm going to add one final one, card num 3. Now I come over here and I still have 1, 1, 1. What we're doing is we're sending information here in a prop down to our card, but we've got to tell our card to use that information. How have we passed information into a function before?
As an argument?
As an argument through the parameters. So what we can do is we can say, hey, card, you're going to get access to some props. And we can prove that's working because before our return, we can throw a console login for our props. And that's regular JavaScript. So we come over here and we get some object that says num, num, num. You can ignore why they're duplicates of those for now. That gets into intricacies of how React works in development mode. So we've got that and we're like, wait a second, that's an object. We know how to access an object, right? We can say props.num, and I'm going to get 1, 2, 3. Well, wait a second. If this is JSX, we can just say, hold up, stop running the HTML, use our props.num. Well, that means if I come over here, now I've got card 1, 2, and 3. Okay, well, that's kind of cool. We can practice a little bit more with that. We can add in some information here. We can say our text is going to equal hello. Our text on the second one is going to equal world. And our text in the third one is going to equal, I don't know, Geronimo. Okay, I save. I come over here. My text hasn't updated yet. That's okay. I need to tell my component here, hey, you, instead of showing all of that, are going to show our props.text. Why text? Because that's what I called the prop up here. So I save that. I come over. Hello, world, Geronimo. I'm well aware that's not how you spell it. Close enough. Okay. So, and if I wanted to, I could say, you know what? I don't have a link for this. So I can come in here, delete my A tag once, and because we have 3 cards, the button disappears from all 3 of them. Kind of making sense? We're feeling good about this. But you know what? One thing that I hate about our HTML is it's too goddamn long, isn't it? We make these files, they get to be hundreds of lines of code. I want to go update my card in one place, and I need to go update a gazillion different cards and find it all in my code. Wouldn't it be nice if we could come over to our source folder? Very, very, very important that we do this inside our source folder, not at the outside playground level. All of our components need to be either in our source folder or somewhere nested within that. But within our source folder, we can actually create a new file called card.js. And we follow that naming convention whenever we make our own components. We're going to use that uppercase C. So I'm going to create that file. I'm going to go to my app.js. I'm going to take this whole const card and move it into my card.js. I come back over to my browser and it's mad. It's like, I don't know what card is anymore. Okay, well, what we need to do is export that card out of the card file so we can import it into our app. So we go back over to our card.js and we're going to say export.
Sorry.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Can you go back to where, like, what did you copy to put in that folder? I did not see it, and I don't want to get lost.
I created card.js and I just copied the const card and the function that's assigned to it.
Okay.
And I cut that out of app.js. So app.js is back to just our app.
Okay.
And then card is over here now on its own file.
Gotcha.
Continue.
So sorry.
I'm going to add a new line to that says export it. Basically, before we can import anything, that file has to be willing to give up the function, the component. So we're going to export. We're going to use a default export here. We're going to say, hey, when you try and import anything from this file, we want you to take the card. Now, because we've exported it here, we can head back over to our app.js and import our card from, and now we've got to give it the file path. I'm going to import it from the card file over there. Now, when I save, I get not only all 3 of my cards back, but now I've got card and its own file. And whatever changes I make to here, like adding, I don't know, an exclamation point, is going to update all 3 of those components over here. Okay, pausing there, polling, giving you guys a chance to play around with your code. Your code doesn't need to be the exact same as my code, but if you want to play around with moving a component into its own file, exporting it out and importing it into app.js so you can reference it down here, you are more than welcome to. So following this code, if you're a visual learner, can document this out. Our export here, we created a new file called card.js. That's on the right half of my screen. In my card, I made a new function, the capital C. I told it some props are going to get passed into it. And then whatever comes out of my return is the HTML that's going to show up every time I use this function. Now, because it's a function, we kind of put it aside, but we say export that function out from my card right here. So this card lines up with this card, and now card just kind of sits over in there and collects dust. Now, in order to be able to reference this card here, I need to be able to import whatever is getting exported over here. So now my app.js is able to get access to my card.js because it has imported it from the file path of my card over here. Okay, great. But I still haven't called that function. I haven't told that component to show up yet. In order to do that, what I do is I go down, I've got my return of my app.js. I've got all my HTML elements that I know and love. And then I come down and I hit card. Now my card is going to pause the execution and it's going to say, wait a second, card is imported. Oh, had it scrolled to the right spot. Card is imported from up here. So this card right here is getting referenced down in my card right here. So that means anytime I have this tag card, all of this information in the return is going to get dumped in not only here, but also here and here. That gives me 3 cards. The problem, as Brian figured out, is we can't change that card and have it be different for each card. Well, I don't want my card title and my card text to be the same every time. So what I am able to do is use props. I am able to say, hey, I am going to pass in information to my props. So I'm going to pass in num and text. Both of those are going to get passed in to the props right here. I am able to use those props, which is just an object that's getting generated in my props.num and my props.text. So both the num and the text are going to pull not only from my first component, they're also going to pull from my second component and my third. This is all the same card component, but what I'm doing is I'm reusing, don't repeating yourself, DRYing my code out. So I can say every time I want a card, this is what's going to show up. But based off of the unique information in the props, I'm going to update my component to pass through that information. Okay, how are we feeling about that? Cool. So we're going to take this a step further. We are going to set up a new button. And I want my button to say, when I click on a button, I want you to show me the number of times the button has been clicked. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to do this right at the top of my app. I'm going to add a p tag in here that says button has been clicked 0 times. Well, I don't have a button, so I'm going to add a button that says click me. Okay. Now, how in JavaScript would we make this button do something?
On click.
Sure. Let's on-click that sucker. Only difference now is that we're using a capital C because React loves camel case even more than JavaScript does. Now, what did we attach to our on-click before?
Some kind of function or event handler.
Yeah, exactly. So we can do that. We can say button clicked. Well, where did we define button clicked? Well, it makes sense to me to do it up in the JavaScript-y part of this all, right? So I can say const button clicked, and that's going to equal some function. And before I get ahead of myself, I'm going to make sure this is working. So I just throw a console log hit in there. I come over to my browser. I have my click me. Nothing else is in my console, but when I hit click me, I get my hit. So this is another time that we can use that JSX syntax to merge together our HTML code with the function, the on-click event handler that is supposed to run. Okay, well, I want my button to update and show me the number of times that I've clicked on it. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say let counter equal 0. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to use my counter in here. And in my button clicked, I would like to add 1 to my counter. Seems to make sense. I come over here. I've got my button has been clicked 0 times. I click me. Nothing happens. Well, my hit's working. When I come over here, I hit click me again and I get it again. Like, excuse me, why isn't that updating? So I come back over here and I say, maybe my counter is screwed up. So I'm going to add a console log counter. I come back over and I refresh everything. I hit click me and I get 1. Well, that still says 0. And I hit click me again and I get 2. What do we know from our JavaScript? Updating the variable isn't enough. What do we need to do in order to get our variable to show up in our HTML?
We have to
HTML.
We have to generate the HTML, or we have to use that inner HTML to update it. But React's got a trick up its sleeve. It says, you know what? Most web apps have a lot of data these days, and that data updates all the time. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just store your data in a special kind of variable. And whenever that variable gets set, we're going to automatically update your HTML for you. Okay, we're introducing the concept of state here. State is a special kind of variable that React gives you access to, that whenever we update that state, it's going to automatically rerun our return for us and update the HTML without us needing to touch the DOM. To show how that works, we're going to go back over here, and up at the top, I need to import a new variable. I'm going to import useState, and if you rely on VS Code here and hit enter, it will automatically complete the from React. useState is a special import called a hook. It is what React is giving us access to. This is goodness that React has baked in under the hood that we can just take advantage of.
Before you move on, sorry.
Yep.
How did you get that text? You just put use state. What did you press on your?
Just enter when the autocomplete starts showing up. So I did import curly's use s, and it gives me this autocomplete. And if you hit enter on that, it will autofill the rest of it for you.
Gotcha. Sorry, go ahead.
No problem. It's questions I like. Okay, so we've got our use state imported. Now we have to use our use state. Use state's a little weird though, in that we can't update the state directly. Whenever we want to update the state, we need to use the set function. So use state gives us access to two variables. One is the value in the state, and the second one is a function we can use to update that state. I'm going to show you how we do that. I'm going to say const, and I'm going to pass an array here because, again, we're getting access to two different things. We need to pull that out as an array so we can get both things. The first thing I'm going to get is my counter. The second thing I'm going to get is a function that allows me to set the counter. And we are going to hitch that up to useState. And the parameter that useState takes is the initial value of the state. We're going to start our counter at 0. Now I'm going to get rid of my counter down here because that counter wasn't doing anything for me. And what I'm going to do is say every time the button is clicked, set our counter. Whoa, where's our set coming from? That's coming from right up here. And what do we want to set our counter to? We want to set it to counter +1. Now, when I save and come back over to my browser, I've got button has clicked 0 times. And if I click me, I get 1. If I click it again, I get 2.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna bother, but I want to understand this. So when you set at the bottom a const button clicked, you set counter, then counter +1. Why would you set it to counter +1 when in the past we've done counter ++?
So we cannot modify state directly. We
Okay.
cannot update the value of counter. In order for us to update the value of counter and get all the goodness of it automatically updating for us, we have to use the set value instead.
Right.
So we aren't allowed to say counter equals 5.
Mm,
That's not allowed because when we had counter up here and we updated it, it was actually updating that variable for us, but it didn't know to rerun this return to show the new value of counter. And so that's why we use state. State is not only going to give us the value, and we call that an immutable value. We're not allowed to change that value directly. The only way we're allowed to change that value is by using this set function. This set function is going to take whatever the new value is and not only update counter for us, but because we're using the set function, it knows to show the updated value down here.
Mm. Okay.
So that's why we use state. Whenever we are updating a value, and this is like, if you get one thing out of tonight, it's we use state because when we set a value for that variable in state, it automatically will update our DOM and our HTML for us to reflect that new value.
So update the DOM and the HTML to reflect what we've,
Well, the HTML is in the DOM, so I guess that's kind of one and the same, but yes,
to reflect what we requested.
correct. To reflect the new value of the variable in state because we use set.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So I'm going to pause there because there's a lot to let sink in there. And I'm going to go over a visual trace of that. So we've got counter down here, but before we can do anything in counter, we need access to use state. So we go to okay, let me draw. We go to React and we pull out this function called use state. Now, in order to use state, which is the function that we're passing in right from here, we need to set an initial value. What do we want our variable to start at? That's what goes in the parentheses of use state. Now, use state gives us access to two items. It gives us access to the value of counter. That means 0 is going to be in counter, but it also gives us access to this function called set counter. And because it's returning out two different things and we want access to both of them, we need to use an array to get access to both of those items. Okay, now we've got that and that's hanging out. We reference our counter down here in curly braces. That means this counter is going to show up right here. The first time our page loads, 0 is going to go into our counter. But whenever we update the value of counter, we're not allowed to just say counter equals something. We need to use this set function instead. So we do that right down here. We say, hey, on click of the button, go up to this function right here. This function is going to use set counter, which came out of our use state. And what we are going to set the counter to is whatever the current value of the counter is plus 1. This is the equivalent of saying counter equals something, but because it's in state, we are not allowed to update that variable directly. So instead, we use the set function, and because we abided by React's rules and use set, it is smart enough to say, wait a second, counter got updated to a new value. It got set to a new value. So because of that, we need to update this button has been clicked counter times to reflect the value that is in counter. The ugliest color, green, my lines. Change it to a pretty blue.
Hey, Max, so I just have a couple questions, and they're more so just maybe to help get a better understanding of how this is working. But
Those
that's
are the
fine.
best
All
kinds
right.
of questions.
I agree. All right. So starting at the top, the import, right? It's coming in curly braces. So would I be wrong to assume that use state is an object?
React returns out in its imports lots of different things in an object. And so because React can export multiple items, kind of for the same reason we have to use an array here, we have to use the object here because React can export multiple things in an object.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. And to the next part. So and that kind of leads into the next question. When we're setting the variables that come out of use state,
Mhm.
right? So I'm guessing those like, because they're in brackets, we're basically just naming those functions. Like, they could be named anything, right? But
Correct.
we're naming them. Now, does the sequence matter in this case? Does like the
Sequence does matter. The value has to be the first thing, and the function to set the value has to be the second.
okay.
And naming convention says in React that you call it set and whatever the variable name is. However, that is not a requirement of React. So if we wanted to call this my num updater, we could, as long as we use that down here. And because of that, this will still work. However, React convention says to call this set and whatever the variable name is in order for consistency.
Gotcha. Sort of like response and, you know, like stuff like that.
Request, response, yeah, event, all of that kind of stuff. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, that's all I was wondering. Thank you.
How are we feeling? We've got one more concept to go. And then I say, screw it, let's build something fun in React. You can't contain me in a playground. I just throw sand everywhere and make people cry. Just get me into projects, you know? Okay. We got one more concept that we need to cover, and that is, hey, you know, JavaScript's pretty cool because we've got like a bunch of data, right? Wouldn't it be cool if we could hitch an array almost directly into a component and have 3 things show up? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, I've got my cards and a set cards. And that's going to come from a use state. And instead of passing in 0, because I don't want to keep a number in here, we can keep any data type we want in an array. So I'm sorry, in use state, I'm going to make an array, and arrays are no fun on their own. I'm going to make an array of objects. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to put a number in each one of them. And I'm also going to put my text of first card, and I'm going to make another object, properly make another object with a comma, and say num2, and say text, and say shocker second card. And I'm going to make my num3. And I'm going to say text, and I'm going to say my last card. And put
You're
a comma
missing.
in. Thank you. Okay, so what I would like to do is I want to use this cards array and make one of my component cards come out for each one of them. Well, cards is just a regular array. I can come down here and I can say console log my cards and go look in my browser, and I've got an array of objects. It's kind of what we expect, right? Just stored in state, but that's okay. Now, what do we know about arrays? Whenever we have an array, what do we frequently have to do?
Loop over them.
Got to loop over them. What's the loop that we've used the most?
For of.
For of, and we can use for of, and for of will work great. But we can use another kind of loop that's built right into JavaScript called .map. And what .map does is it's just like a for loop. It's going to loop over each one of them, but it's going to return out an array based off of the loop. So it's kind of like combining generate HTML directly with our for loop. The .map is going to generate new output based off of whatever the input is. And because JSX is awesome, we can actually do that in line. Let me
Can
show
you
you what
do
I'm
that
going to do
again?
here.
Sorry.
So, no, it's .map is just like a for of loop,
Mhm.
except .map is unique in that whatever gets returned from the map is what the output of the loop is going to be.
Mhm.
So we have in the past said, let generate an HTML empty string and then go through that for loop. And every time the for loop runs, shove some HTML directly in it. What a dot map does is says, hey, I'm not only going to loop over everything for you, but based off of what gets returned out of the map is going to be the output, the result of the loop.
Uh-huh. Okay.
That
Okay.
may click in a second.
Yeah.
When you see it in function in use, it may make sense.
Okay.
So I'm going to comment out. I'm going to actually delete out all of my cards. And I'm going to go back over to my browser. I'm going to make sure my cards are gone. Now, I am going to say cards. That's coming from my big array up here. Dot map. Map is a function that is built into any array, can use it in regular JavaScript, not specific to React. What map is going to do is it's going to give me access to each individual card. So when we do our for card of cards, that is exactly what we're doing here. We're saying of cards, map over each one of them, loop over each one, and give me the individual card. And we can prove that this is working because we can console log out our card and see, hey, we get our objects of each individual card. But we just handled the input of the map. We're looping over each one of them. Now we've got to handle the output. What do we want to show up for each one of these cards? So I come over here, and instead of just console logging out the card, I'm going to return. But what am I going to return? I could return just a p tag that says card, and I'm going to get 3 p tags that say card. Or I could have all hell break loose and intermix our JSX or HTML syntax into my JavaScript. I could say return out my card component. And my card component is taking 2 props. One is the num that's coming from each card that we're looping over. And the other is my text, which is also going to come from the card object that I'm looping over. So I go back over here and I've got card 1, card 2, card 3, and I've got all my text showing up. That almost means that I could come over here, and if I wanted a new card, I don't have to update any of my JSX, any of my return, any of my component. I can come in here, just make a new object. Oh my God, Max. Come back over here. I got a 4th card. Or I could just, confuse everyone and call this -1. And we get card -1. So there are a lot of concepts we just combined there. This is like everything we have learned about React so far. And believe it or not, you're very close to learning all the different concepts of React. We've got forms to tackle, and we've got state in different components, and that's it. But I want to make sure we're coming up on break. After break, we want to hit the ground running with these concepts, right? Because we've exposed you to like 90% of what React is. But now we got to build something with it. So what we're going to do after break is start getting into our to-do list. We're going to make an input. We've got to have some way to access that input, and we're going to learn about controlled inputs and how we hitch that up to state and still have access to it. And then we're going to take advantage of that value in state to keep track of a list of tasks. But before you go, what we did to get this working, we put a variable in state. We imported that state from React, and we told it what our state was going to start out as this array. All of that information got stored in our cards. So what we were able to do is to go down to our JSX, and just like regular JavaScript, JSX doesn't like dealing with multiple things. It needs us to loop over them. But instead of using our for of loop, instead we used a .map, because .map is combining the input of the array, and whatever gets returned out of that map is going to be the output that React shows. Now we get access to each individual card. That's just going to be each individual object that we got here, but we wired it up to use our own component called card. Well, where's card coming in from? That's getting imported from our card file. Our card file is right here. Okay, now every time it returns out a new card, all of this div and all of its subdivs are going to get returned. But because we told it to use the props text and num, they are going to line up with our num and our text over here, which let us customize each card while still having reusable code.
And I'm thinking of a for of, it probably doesn't work for a number of reasons, but you can't return in a for of and like have it loop again, right?
Correct.
I see. Okay, it makes sense now.
You could do a for of if you kept everything in an array. If you really wanted to, if you're at your saturation point, tune out, don't pay attention to me. But theoretically, you could say something like to display is an empty array, and then for let card of cards to display dot push card with the text of the card dot text and the num of the card dot num. And then down here, instead of mapping over it, we could just display our to display. And that would accomplish the same thing of having our cards there. However, the reason why I don't show this by default is mapping over things and kind of doing that in line is a very much more common way to generate out components based off an array. While .map is a JavaScript concept and you can use that in vanilla JavaScript, this is certainly the much more React-y way of doing it than doing it like this. And React has a couple of those concepts where, like, we don't use inner HTML, we don't use .value, we rely on state and the virtual DOM to do it the more efficient React way. So while this is completely valid and obviously still works, the .map method is much more common in React.
Looks a lot better too. Gosh, thank you.
No problem. .map is much harder to understand than a for loop when you're learning the JavaScript syntax. And every developer, no matter what language they use, all has a preferred loop. And so I'm obviously impartial to the for of loop. But when we get into React, it's like you gotta use .map and lean into what the React community uses. All right, any other questions before we go on break? Guys have been exposed to 90% of React. We're going to cover that last 10% in our first to-do app, where we start building actually something fun, something usable. But we're going to let this kind of soak in a little bit. We're going to go step by step, and we're going to go super slow in this to-do list app to make sure that all of you guys are following along. Because while learning the concepts, first before actually applying them is a great way to learn. The danger of that is you don't realize that you've learned too many concepts and then you forget how to apply them. So that's why we're going to go a little slow on this to-do list app and make sure, hey, is this sinking in? It's not just good enough that our to-do list app is working. Do we understand the flow of this? Because while before we could read our JavaScript from top to bottom, now the order that our components and our JavaScript code runs are completely shuffled around. So we got to be careful and make sure, hey, not only do we understand what our code is doing, do we understand why we're doing it that way in React? That's what I've got coming for you after the break. Go on break. I will see you guys at 7:25.
I have a quick question. Do you mind, because I didn't do the code, but do you mind posting this on Slack?
No, my code is sacred and I'm going to post it for $1 gazillion.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Any other questions? Cool. See you guys after break. Off the recording and close out of some of this. And I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to head to the regular terminal that's in the Mac. You can command space and hit terminal there. We're going to do this to get practice. Yes, we can do our drag and drop shortcuts, right? But it is important for everyone to have a certain level of comfortability with the terminal. You don't need to master it by the end of the course, but getting practice CDing around, LSing, PWD, all a really good starting point for your terminal knowledge. So whenever I open the terminal, I know I've started in my home folder, but to just confirm that, I'm going to run a PWD. And that's going to show me I'm in my user folder, or also known as my home folder. I'm going to ls and see that my desktop is where I want to head to. So I'm going to cd space into my desktop. From there, I'm going to ls again and make sure that my code folder is where I want to head. It is. So I'm going to cd into my C4 my code. If you're wondering how I'm typing that fast, I'm not. I'm using my tab key in order to autocomplete there, right? So I just did cd space C4, and because there were no other files named C4 my code, it was able to autocomplete that in for me. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to cd into my week 13 folder. Now that I'm in my week 13, I'm going to cd into my day 2 folder. And to really confirm that I've made it down to where I need to get to, I'm going to run my PWD and make sure I am down in my desktop, my code week 13, day 2. If I lost you at any point there, remember you're just CDing. It's just like a JSON object, right? We're peeling back layers. We're going into each individual folder. If I completely lost you and you would like to use the drag and drop trick, you can type in CD and a space, then go to Finder, navigate in your desktop to the week 13 day 2 folder, and drag and drop that folder right into your terminal. You'll see that dropped in the path of the entire folder, and we can hit enter there and also be in that same day 2 working directory. Does anyone need help in terminal? Okay, so we should be good to get started here. We are going to npx create React app. Every space and dash matters here. And we are going to call this to do.
Sorry, before, I meant the day 2 list, and then after that, what do I do? I'm so sorry.
Run a PWD. And if it says you're inside week 13, day 2, you're good to go.
Okay, and then how do I drag it to Visual Code?
You don't yet. We've got to create the folder first.
Okay.
And to create the folder, you're going to run this npx create React app to do.
Okay.
So I'm going to hit enter on that. This should go a little bit quicker on your computers now because you've created a React app already. But it will still take a minute because it's generating out all of those files in node modules. So it always takes a minute to start a new React project up. Oh, there we go. So if I'm in my week 13 day 2 folder in Finder, I can now see I've got my to do folder here. Or if I LS in terminal, I can see I've got my to do. But at this point, I'm going to switch over to the Visual Studio Code terminal instead of using the one in my Mac. So once you get this happy hacking and it's got all of these commands, we are done in the terminal. We can quit out of terminal. We're going to head over to VS Code and file open folder. We are done with our playground. Make sure you're not in your day 1 folder. Make sure you are in day 2. And we are going to pop open to do and hit open. From there, I am going to start a live share with you guys before I forget. And I am going to, in my terminal, in my VS Code, I'm going to go terminal, new terminal. That automatically opened in my to-do area. That is the same exact thing of right-clicking on package.json and opening an integrated terminal. That's just another way to get to it. And I'm going to run my npm space start, which should pop open my Chrome and show me my spinning React logo. And I am going to pause there for anyone who needs a minute to get to that spinning React. Lots of steps there. So if I lost you anywhere, just let me know where and I can go back over them.
So we're turning on the terminal from the package.json.
Yes, from VS Code. Yes. And once you get that terminal open, you're going to run npm space start. Give it a minute and it should pop open your Chrome with a spinning React logo.
Sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but I got kicked off of Zoom again. So I downloaded the app on the terminal and then I have VS Code open here. Is there anything I have to do?
Did you open the terminal and run npm start in VS Code?
No, how do I?
Right click on package.json, go down to open in integrated terminal.
Should it just have name to do version and private? That's it? What does yours look like? Because mine does not look like that.
It should have public source package lock package readme.
No.
Share screen.
So it's only npm space start, right?
Yes. Once you get the terminal open. Ooh, no, that's not what we want. You done screwed up somewhere. Let's figure out.
I done screwed up somewhere.
where.
This is what I have for my.
Oh, okay. Your internet just hates you, so it's still actually
Oh.
downloading everything and making all of those files. So
So
in 3 to 4 hours, you should have everything that you need.
Okay, I'll just pay attention. That's fine.
Once this is done over here and it says happy hacking, like you can see it's pulling in your node modules and all of that stuff. Once you get all of your files, it looks like it's close. Then you can run npm start, and that's what will fire everything up.
Okay, so npm start. So do I exit?
There you
out
go.
of this?
You're good.
So I'm
So
good?
you're good there. You can close out of the other terminal. And in your VS Code terminal down at the bottom, yep, do an npm start. npm.
Oh, npm start. If I can spell.
There you go. I swear, I want to do like a research study of when you know someone else is watching you type, your accuracy just plummets. It looks like you have some other React project running. If you get an error message like Xona has, just hit Y on that.
Just why on where?
In the terminal, click down into the terminal and just hit Y and enter. And that's going to open it up on like 3001 or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
But that's still the same. You're good to go there.
Okay, gotcha. I just never closed the other one.
Yep, that's fine.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anyone else need help?
Oh.
Okie doke. So we are going to get in the habit of doing this very frequently because Create React app gives us a whole bunch of crap that we don't actually need. So beginning of every React project, we got to go through and delete out a bunch of different files. And I am going to finally show you guys how to deal with those pesky warnings. So in my source folder, I'm going to go to my app.js and I'm going to delete out the entire header. And if I save that, I get to my white screen. But down here, I have some warnings. And these warnings aren't anything problematic. Your code's still going to work with them. But it says logo is defined and never used. And it's telling me that's an app.js. If you thought file names and line numbers were important before, wait until you get into React, because now we're going to have different files, different components, things all over the place, right? So those file paths are really going to matter. What it's trying to tell us is logo is defined. In other words, we imported it and never used it. Well, I got a news flash for you. I don't really care about the React logo showing up in my project, right? So I can just delete out that import line and save, and now I get back to my compiled successfully. Now you may think we are done, but if I come in here and just add something like test, shows up centered. And I'm like, it's not supposed to be centered. I want to start out with a clean slate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop open my app.css, and there's a bunch of code in here that I'm like, I don't want any of this. I want to start over with a clean slate. So I'm going to hit Command A and empty that file out. Now, I'm not deleting this file, which would actually cause an error. And I'm not deleting it because we might want to write some CSS. So I'm going to leave that in there, and I'm going to leave it imported up at the top here, but I'm just going to make sure it's empty in here. Now, when we come over here, we've got our test. We're good to go. Now, we could layer Bootstrap in here, but we're not going to do that yet. We're going to get our core functionality up and running. And depending on how long that takes us into Wednesday or Thursday, maybe we go back in and reintroduce Bootstrap and say, hey, this is how we go back through and spruce up our app. Think more of design minded. But for now, we're going to get started on our to-do list app. So how do we do that? What's the first thing you guys think of a user experience for a to-do list app?
Place to put the list.
Place to put the list. We got to be able to add an item to the list, and then we got to be able to see the list. Okay. Kind of reminds me of some acronym. It's like, got to deal with some CRUD or something. Oh, let's come back to that one. Okay. Focusing in on our create, we are going to create an input like we create any kind of input. So I'm going to delete out my word test, and I'm going to create an input. And just like regular HTML, we can say type text. And we can make that a self-closing tag because we're not going to put any additional information in there. And I come over and I got my little input. All right, that's cool. We also probably want a button with a type of submit. And it's going to say add task. And I come back over and I got my little button. All right. And whenever we have an input and a button, instead of putting our on click directly on this button, it is better to put everything into a form, because this approach will make it so when you hit the enter key on your keyboard, it will submit the form for you. If you add an on click directly on this button, the enter button on your keyboard won't work. So putting everything in a form and then telling this is a type submit is a better approach. Okay, hopefully nothing out of the blue here. This is regular HTML for us, not gotten into anything Reacty. But we think about functionality here, right? Where you're building a web app, we're building something interactive. So we now want to bridge the gap between our HTML and our JavaScript. So we're going to do an on submit. Make sure we've got a capital S there. and we're going to say form submitted. Okay, well, if we told it the form was submitted, we need to tell it what to do when the form is submitted. So I'm going to go up between my function and my return, and I'm going to add my const form submitted. And that's going to be some function, and I'm just going to console log form submitted. Okay. Nothing really out of the blue there. Yeah, we got some JavaScript mixing in with our HTML, but nothing shocking. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to pop open my console. I'm going to type in test and hit add task. Nothing happened. I'm going to hit test. And if you look really closely at my console, I hit add task. Something flashes there for a very split second and disappears. What do we need?
What is that thing we did to stop the page from refreshing?
That's exactly what's happening. Our form is being submitted and it's like, refresh the page, send that information to the back end. And we're like, no, dingus, just stop the default action, prevent the default form submission, because we're going to handle that ourselves. This is a good example of just because we're in React doesn't mean we've left the bounds of JavaScript. Right? This is just another HTML form that's getting submitted. The only difference here is that we hooked our onSubmit event directly into a function all in the same page, right? So it's not the end of the world. I come over here, I type in ABC, I hit add task, and I've got my form submitted. Pausing there and passing it over to Alba.
Hey, Max, your screen is really small because I'm only on my laptop.
Mhm.
You do a live share so I could actually see what's going on.
Not only can I do a live share, I already did a live share at 7:31.
Mine said that it was canceled.
Oh,
I used a link that was in the most recent link that's in Slack should work. That's what I used.
yeah, I did post a new link. If you scroll down to the bottom of the live stream counter, you should be able to get in with that link. It ends in 107.
107.
Okay, so we've got our code here. Got mostly everyone in. Does anyone else need help? Alba, were you able to get in?
No, I'm in. All right, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so we've got our ABC, we've got our add task, we've got our form submitted. Now, what do we have to do? We've got to say, all right, well, we want to take this task and add it to a list of all of our tasks. But in order to do that, we need to know what they typed in here. In React, this is what we call an uncontrolled input. An uncontrolled input is basically saying React is not controlling the value or the event, the onChange event that happens there. That input is getting controlled by the browser, so it is uncontrolled to React. The way we do that is we hitch up our input value and onChange to React state. To show how we do that, I'm going to import my useState from React. Then I am going to come in here, make sure I am outside my form submitted, but still inside my function, because we can't use state unless it is in a component or a function. And what we're going to do is I'm going to say const new task and set new task. And that is going to be coming from our useState. And the state that we want to start it out in is an empty string. Now I come down to my input and I say my input value is going to come from my new task state. Okay. Kind of makes sense, right? I'm typing in my text and my new task is in there, and maybe I'll be able to get access to this. And we know whenever the task updates, whenever state updates, we automatically update our return. We're all good. We're good to go. I come over here. I go into my input. I type A. Nothing happens. And type anything. Nothing happens. Why not? I gave you my value. What do we need to do? We told React to control the value, but we didn't tell React how to update the value in state when our input changes. So we come in here and we add an on change. And our on change is going to say text updated. Okay, well, where's text updated? We've got to tell it how to update the text. So I'm going to say text updated is equal to a new function. This function, it's an on change. It's an event. Well, if it's an event, I get access to the event. And in here, I can set my new task to the event target value. Wait a second, that's our old friend. That's just some vanilla JavaScript right there. So if I come over here and I type in ABC, now my ABC shows up. I'm gonna pause there, poll, make sure people are following, give everyone a minute to catch up, and then I will go through a review of everything we just did. A lot of new code there. So just giving you guys a minute for that to soak in. If you got it working, start tracing through. How is that working? What order does that execute in? Look at Mel's example of his comments and say, do I understand this code to the level that I can write line by line what everything is doing here?
I just have a quick question, maybe has relevance, but when you want to write out comments, what kind of comment, what is the form or what is the
Loaded question. Very, very loaded question in React.
Okay.
Before you get to the return, if you're inside a function, like up here, that syntax is just like JavaScript, right? Because all of the stuff up here is JavaScript. So you can write, a single line comment, and you can do your multi lines, and all of that is perfectly fine. None of that aggravates React. Down here, because this is HTML, you can technically do some kind of, no, you can't. Maybe you can't. No, you can't even do an HTML comment. The way you do it in React, if you're down in your HTML, is you've kind of got to trick it and say, hey, there's some JavaScript coming your way. So we do our curly braces, and then we say, hey, we can do a comment in here. And because this is valid JavaScript, this is all valid to React. So if we are in the JavaScript part of our JSX, we can use comments like we always do.
Mhm.
If we are in the HTML part down here, we need to tell it, hey, you've got some JavaScript headed your way, and then send it a JavaScript comment. However, we can't use this double line here, because if we use a single line, it doesn't know that that is the end of our JavaScript. So that's why we've got to use a multi-line here. The good news is VS Code is smarter than we are and will know where we're at. So if I add some comment here and hit Command/, it will actually put in the right comment type for us by using that Command/, command. So that's what I would recommend. If you're up here and hit Command/, you'll notice it does the right thing. And if you're down here and you add some comment after you're done typing it, hit Command/, and it will do the right thing and put in the right kind of comment out.
Okay, so Command/ essentially would be the easiest to
Yes.
remembering it. Okay.
But understanding the syntax of the comment, of basically tricking React into saying, hey, I've got some JavaScript, and then the only JavaScript in there is a comment, essentially.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so let's do a quick little review of everything that we just did in here, because I think most of you guys are caught up. Initially, what we had was this input type text. By default, whenever we create a new input, that is considered an uncontrolled input. In other words, React is not in control of that input. Your browser's taking care of it for you. That's fine, but sometimes we want control of that input in React. We want to know what was typed into it. In order to convert an input from uncontrolled to controlled, we have to add two things to it: a value and an on change. Before we do any of that, though, we need a place to hook that up to. We need a state to store it in. So we import our use state from up here. We come down and we say use state is going to start out as an empty string, and use state always gives us access to two things: new task and set new task. That is because we aren't allowed to set new task equal to anything. Whenever we want to update whatever new task is, we've got to call this function called set new task. Okay, now we've got that wired up and we have access to it, but we've got to connect it into our input. So we come down here and we say, hey, the value of this input is always going to equal new task. And whenever that input changes, go run the function text updated. Text updated is going to come up here, and every single time a letter is typed into that input, it is going to fire off this function that gives us the event. Well, the event is going to have the value of the input, and it is running the set from our use state to update new task in the state to update the value down here. That seems wildly inefficient to anyone. It seemed wildly inefficient to me. And here we are 6 years later, and I cannot tell you how many inputs I've created doing an on change and a value and hooking it up to state. That is the React way of doing it. Okay, well, we did all of that. What good did that do us? Well, we have our form submitted, which is getting triggered from our type submit button. That's firing the on submit. That's giving us access to the event. That's letting us prevent that default form submission from going in. If all of that is true, what I should be able to do is console log my new task. Whoa, where's that coming from? Well, any time that text got updated, it set it into my state right here. So after we're done changing all of that and actually submit the form, now we get access to that value in state. So I come over here, I typed in ABC, I hit add task, and now I get ABC. How are we feeling? We feeling not only like we wrote the code, but feeling like we understand the code. Jen, are you talking to us?
I am. I said, did we define text update anywhere?
We sure did.
Okay, set, and why I do not have it. Oh, because I didn't set it. Okay. Perfect. That's what I'm missing.
I am almost to the point where I can look at the console in the page.
You need help there? Okay.
Lost the feed to the Chrome to the server.
In your terminal down here, do you still have compiled successfully localhost 3000?
Failed to compile.
Okay, what's your error in there?
Syntax error.
Online?
Function app.
Share your screen. You deleted the space between function and app. On line 6, you've got function app, and it should be function space app.
Here.
Uh-huh. Okay, now you got a different error. Import and export may only exist at the top level. Okay, now you're really trippy. You've got 2 apps. So you've got your function up here with your new task, your form submitted, your text updated, and then you're like, screw it, I'm going to make another app. I don't know how you ended up with 2 of them, but now you're back in business.
I still don't have like the.
If you right click on this, you can, no, you can't. You can command click on it and that will pop it open for you in the web browser, or you can just go to localhost 3000 manually.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
I share my screen so you can tell me if I'm.
You sure can.
Thanks.
Okay. So pop open your console. And go there, and then your ABC is showing up there. But if you type, ABCD into your input and hit the add task button, you should see ABCD in your terminal or your console. That means you're all caught up.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Anyone else need help? Okay. Now we get to the fun part. We have created, but we're not reading anything yet, right? We've got our task and we know what got typed in, but we got to store all of that somewhere. So the naive developer, the developer who's just learning React, would say, oh, just make an array and throw everything in that array. But we say, wait a second. We want our HTML to update every time that task array has been modified. We want to say, based off of this action, what gets displayed to the end user changes. Because that is the case, we're going to be smart and say, you know what? We want to store that information in an array. So what we're going to do is not only store that information in an array of our tasks, And the way to set our tasks, we are going to use state to store that array in state. In other words, whenever we update our tasks, our HTML is going to see those tasks have changed and automatically regenerate itself. But we run into another problem. Down here, we've got our new task and we just want to push that into state. But what does push do? It modifies that array. Well, crap. In React, we can't modify the variable itself. We have to use the set function. So we get a little crafty. Instead of taking tasks and pushing into tasks, what happens if we set all of our tasks to a new array? And that array is not only going to take our new task, it is also going to take a copy of all the current tasks. Okay, a little trippy there, but what we're doing is we're saying take all the current tasks that are in the state, take every item in the array, and dump them out into this new array that we're creating right here. That ... is called a spread operator. That spread operator is saying take all the items in task and dump them out into this array. Then take the new task that got typed into the state and set that entire new array into our array of tasks that is stored in state. Let that marinate for a second. We've got one more thing we got to do to make all of this work. We've got all of our items in a task array. Now we need to make them show up. So I come down here and I say, all right, outside of my form, I'm going to make all of my tasks show up in an unordered list, a UL. I just want bullet points for each one. Now I'm going to go to my tasks. I'm using my curly braces, so React knows some JavaScript's headed its way. And I'm going to map over each one of the tasks to get access to each individual task. If that is the case, I would like to return a list item for every one of my tasks that shows the task inside of it. If you're following along, when we come over here and type in ABC and hit add task, we get a bullet point. Ignore the warning in the console. We'll fix that in 1 second. And if we come in here and say 1, 2, 3 and hit add task, we get our next item. Pause there, let you guys catch up, and then I will do a code review next. Relaunching the poll.
So where is it supposed to show? It's supposed to show in the main screen, right?
Yep, bullet points kind of right there. And that is because we modified our form submitted. We created our use state. We use that set tasks based off of the new task that was coming in from state as well. And then we came down here and modified our return to include a UL, which mapped over each one of the tasks and showed that information right there.
Can you scroll up just a little bit? Thank you.
No problem.
Before I
the-
get behind trying to look at this, I could use your help
Sure.
figuring out why it's not working. I fixed a couple of things, but
Okay, so first thing, new task is not defined. Oh, excuse me, on line 9. You guys aren't the only ones who are tired. Okay, so it is saying it doesn't know what new task is. So let's figure out where new task is defined. New task is defined right up here.
Mhm.
What do you see different between our new task here, which we want it to use, and our new task here?
Oh, it's the spelling.
Mhm. Okay, now you've got compiled successfully. It's not
Mhm.
cranky at you, so let's go over to the browser and see what's going on over there.
How do I go back to the browser? Because I closed them.
In Chrome,
Can I just like restart my integrated terminal?
that works. Okay, so type in something in your text box. And nothing's showing up, right? So we, oh, never mind. Okay, hit add task and let's see what happens.
Oops.
You're all caught up. You're fully functional. We'll deal with that warning in a
That's-
second.
Fix that.
We'll fix it.
Okay,
I have it too.
okay.
But you're good. You can type something else in and hit the add task button again and it will show up.
Okay, great.
Okay, so let's do a little trace path here unless anyone else needs help. Okay, so we've got our form submitted, hooked up. We've got our on change all firing. Now we say, all right, what are we doing when that form is submitted? We prevent the default thing, don't refresh the page. Now we say set tasks. Set tasks is coming from state and it starts out as an empty array. That empty array is now in tasks. But we can't just push onto that array because pushing modifies the original array. We aren't allowed to update anything in state unless we use the set function. So what we do is we come down here and we say set tasks. It's going to overwrite whatever is in tasks with a new array. And that new array is going to take the current array, any tasks that we already have added to the list, and spread them out into this new array we just created. In other words, take all the existing tasks and copy them into this new array that we're working with. And based off of that, we also want to add in our new task that is coming from state, which is hooked up to the value of our input that gets updated on change to set the new task into our state of the new task variable that we use down here. Pretty sure you guys would get a little nauseated if I drew all of that out with lines at this point. But hopefully we're seeing how all of this connects together. When we see new task here, that new task is wired up to our state here that gets updated down here. All of this meshes together. We delete any one part of this and the whole thing stops to work. But what we've got going on, we set our tasks here. That means once we do all that hubbubaloo of taking the current tasks, copying them into the array, we have access to our tasks right here. Now, when we come down here, we do the tasks, that's our array, and we map over them. We get each individual task. That gives us access to the individual task. We come into this LI, we get our task to show up. That means whenever we type in something new and hit the add task button, it shows up in our list. Before we do anything new and take care of that warning and a couple other things for cleanup, do we have any questions on this flow? Don't worry, we're nearing the stopping point for tonight. I have saturated your brains. I know where our limits are. But do we understand this so far? Are there any pieces of this that we need to go through?
I don't know what I need to have gone through.
Okay, that's fair. I will ask that question at the beginning of class tomorrow as well. So if you generate a list of what we need to review between now and 5:30 tomorrow, we can definitely start class there tomorrow.
Okay.
I believe I get and understand the process of it. I don't
A
think
lot.
that I could actually type it myself.
That's okay.
But it's just like it's not gonna be.
That
Mhm.
is okay, because this is our first app and we keep on going back to apps we've already done. And at a certain point, you're going to be like, Max, please stop pulling apps from the graveyard. That project was dead and gone and you brought it back again. It's okay. We're going to take in familiar apps we've already done and start layering them all in. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you redo tic-tac-toe, but we are going to go back to a couple of our old favorites and start layering in React to get practice with each one of them. Okay, one annoying thing. So if we go over to our console, it says each child in a list should have a unique key prompt. Basically, what React is trying to tell us here is whenever we map over something, it struggles to keep track of each item that it puts out because it's dynamically generated. Well, that's not really ideal. Normally, when we loop over something, we have a unique ID to use for that item. In this case, we don't, because IDs are usually generated by the database. But React still wants some additional prop added to our list item because it's in a loop to help it keep track of it. So what we're able to do is, it turns out map not only gives us access to each individual task, it also gives us access to the index of that item in the array. Now, there is a whole slew of reasons why using indexes for IDs is not great. But you guys, it is 8:15. You don't need a whole spiel on that. Get to that later. For right now, we're going to use the index, and all we're going to do is on our LI, we're going to add a prop, which probably looks like an HTML attribute to you, that uses, oh, I'm sorry, this should say key equals index. And again, what that's doing is it's using the index of the array and giving React a key that can keep track of that for any dynamically generated looped over items. Now, if we head back over to React and refresh, you'll see if we refresh, our state gets cleared out. That's normal. We've got nothing in the list. I'm going to type in 1, 2, 3 and hit add task. Now I get no warning message, and I can say 4, 5, 6, add task, and that shows up as well.
Max, could you please unselect the key in your code? I'm trying to
Yes.
think.
So index, key equals, curly braces, index are the two things we added to get rid of that warning message.
Max, my console is telling me to download React DevTools for a better development experience. Is that
At some point, if you are going to continue on with React after the boot camp, you should definitely download the dev tools. Until then, you won't need them for anything we do in class. Depending on how much time we have towards the end of the module, I may spend some class time downloading them and showing you like some of the benefits of them. Because a graduate from cohort 3 said that that was one thing that they learned after the cohort that they really wish they knew before they started working. So we always try and incorporate feedback from previous cohorts into our curriculum. So if we do have time, I will go over them, but for now you can just ignore that. All right, final opportunity for questions tonight before we get into vocab. Okay, I'm switching over to the outline. Of course, I didn't leave it open. All right, what terms did we touch on tonight?
Component,
Component. A custom HTML oh, I'm gonna totally cheat. Component is such an important important concept that I don't want to mess it up. React elements describing what should appear on the screen. I like that. May always returns HTML, may include state and other functions required for functionality.
since you have state up there, maybe state.
State. A special variable that cannot be directly updated. I'm putting immutable here. However, by using the set function, we are able to re-render HTML based off the updated state value. And I'm going to put in here React hook. And we'll learn more about hooks later. I'm just going to say built-in React hook.
Next to a special variable that cannot, is that B?
No, it can't be me. Sorry, you cannot capture me in a variable. About map. Another JS loop that generates output by looping by looping over each item in an array.
Can you write an example underneath that of a map?
So we can say items dot map item that returns li with the item inside of it. Close enough. Turns out writing code when it's not monospaced is really hard to read. And it's something you don't really realize until you have to do it. And then you're like, I know JavaScript, but why can I not read that?
I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure we already did it yesterday, but you state.
Use state. I'm just gonna modify that because it's kind of included in here. I will add in built-in React hook and then say, IE, and I'm gonna do an example. Item set items equals use state that starts out as an empty array.
Sorry, can you make the IE the same way that you put it in maps? So the spacing underneath it, sorry. I'm being very picky, but thank you. Did we touch up on yesterday on import?
No, import's new tonight. Import and export. A way we can access code in other files and reference it in another.
Spread operator?
Ooh, good one. Spread operator takes existing array or object, pro tip, and copies it and spreads it out into a new array. And I am going to cheat and go to day 3 because we are ahead of schedule. Nope, I'm gonna go to day 4.
Are we that ahead?
And we're gonna take, oh God, all of this. Someone did not do a good job on the outlines this week. And by someone is me, and I'm gonna put all those resources in there. So a lot of the concepts that we covered tonight are all linked in these resources. So if you guys are feeling jazzed about React and want to get some extra reading in, tonight's outline is the outline to hit up for a bunch of links and practice. Some old friends like Free Code Camp in here and Spread Syntax. And then some other information like use state and mapping. That links to MDN, all kinds of good stuff in there if you guys want some additional reading tonight.
One of my questions was gonna be about Emmet, because I tried, when we were doing the HTML page, I tried the Emmet and it wasn't working. I was like, is there an Emmet for this?
So this is, I believe, a VS Code. Yeah, it's settings in VS Code that allow you to do Emmet in React. I personally don't use that, and I write React code quite literally for a living. But if you are a big Emmet fan, you are more than welcome to follow this Medium article and try and get it working. Obviously, it's a question that's come up before, so happy to include that link. You need Emmet less than you think in React because everything is so modular and you can break things down into small components that you won't need it as much, but it is definitely an option if you do. Anything else for tonight? You're muted, Exana. Yes. I can read lips.
Thank you. What about dot prevent default?
I think we've got that somewhere, but never hurts to give it another event prevent default stops the browser from refreshing the page, allows us to run our own function, i.e. handling of the form submission instead of the default browser action.
Props
Props, that's a very important one.
and keys.
Looks like HTML attributes, a way to pass unique data into a component. And key is a special prop React uses in any components generated in a loop in order to keep track of when they get updated. Required for any, let me try and weave the word required in there. A special required prop.
And just one more, I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
What about set? Like a set? You said, for the example, like tasks, then set tasks.
That's kind of part of
Over
this
there?
set up
Okay.
here. And let me see. Built-in React hook. Always return, always uses two variables. One which stores the value, and another which is a function to update the value.
So items stores the value, or the function is set items?
Items is the value, set items is the function to update the value of items.
Okay.
Did that answer your question? Sorry,
Yeah.
I've gotten to the point where I'm as tired as you guys are.
No, yeah, that does, because I really couldn't tell which one does what, but yes, that does. Thank you. And other than that, I have nothing else.
Last call. You guys almost got out 6 minutes early, but we went into notes, which is a good use of time. Oh, you're fine. Rather capture it now, because you're going to look at this tomorrow and be like, oh my God, what did we learn yesterday? All right. You guys have an awesome evening. I will see you tomorrow night.
Thank you. Have a good night, guys.